The Republican primary has resulted in a landslide for Herbert K. Hyde, the first Oklahoma-born candidate and the youngest candidate ever to receive a major party nomination in Oklahoma. If elected, he'll be the second Oklahoman of Indian ancestry to sit in the United States Senate. Robert L. Owens was the first. The young Hyde carried 73 out of 77 Oklahoma counties against his veteran opponents. Evidently, the voters have not forgotten Hyde's record as United States District Attorney, when he won national recognition for breaking up the most infamous gang of kidnappers in America and put Machine Gun Kelly, Albert Bates, and Harvey Bailey behind prison bars. Hyde's first work was delivering clothes for his widowed mother who did washing to support her fatherless children. During grade school days, he shined shoes, sold papers, and swept offices. Entered OU in 1917, earning his way by picking cotton, jerking sodas, and clerking in stores. Left school to volunteer in the Navy when the United States entered the World War. He completed his law course at Boston University Law School, earning expenses as night watchman and waiter. Spent 2 years in Washington as secretary to Senator Pine. As assistant U.S. District Attorney, Hyde smashed stock frauds and underworld rackets. At age of 33, he became nation's youngest United States District Attorney. Hyde won nationwide approval in securing convictions of Machine Gun Kelly, Albert Bates, Harvey Bailey, and other members of this vicious kidnap ring. The largest political gathering in the history of Cleveland County heard Herbert Hyde at Norman on his 38th birthday pledge himself to rescue human need from political greed.
My mother taught me in childhood an old Cherokee proverb. It says that he who takes more than his fair share is a thief, and he who takes less is a fool. This was the golden rule of the red man long before Columbus discovered America. I think it states the principle that should guide us in the solution of our nation's problems. I also learned at my mother's knee that the first command of God to Adam was, be fruitful, and multiply and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the air, and over every living thing. These were my earliest recollections. I shall wage my campaign for the United States Senate upon the principle that he who takes more than his fair share is a thief, and that man should replenish the earth and take dominion over the wealth that God gave him. I shall combat the unchristian and the inhuman doctrine that food and crops should be destroyed in the face of human want and human suffering. I base my program on the proposition that in a nation where there is plenty for all, there should be poverty for none. In setting our nation's house in order and relieving the economic distress of our people, it might be well to consult the Holy Bible and learn anew the lessons that have lived in the hearts of mankind for 30 centuries. The Bible is the torch of civilization. Of course, it was written away back yonder in the horse and buggy days. Some people think it not applicable in this age and generation. To me, however, it is still a beacon light shining and guiding our path along life's highway. There is a lesson found in the 41st chapter of Genesis concerning a young lad named Joseph, who was sold into bondage by his jealous brothers and taken into the land of Egypt where Pharaoh was king. On one occasion, Pharaoh had a dream of 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows, of 7 ears of corn being devoured by 7 lean ears of corn. When his wise men could not interpret his dream, Joseph explained it to Pharaoh. Joseph said, God governs in the affairs of mankind, and he advises there will be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. He commands us to save and to store up during the 7 years of plenty 1/5 of all the grain, the meats, the oil, and 1/5 of all the raw materials which go to make up the sustenance of life, in order that our people may be well fed and well clothed and well housed during the 7 years of famine. Joseph was made head of the kingdom of Egypt, and so it came to pass that the Egyptian people lived well during the lean years. Time was when we had plenty, when vast fields of cotton delighted the eye and brought the necessities of life, if not the luxuries of wealth, to thousands of people of Oklahoma. And it brought God-given work to thousands more in fields and mills and factories. That cotton found its way into the mills of this country and those of foreign lands. Sometimes it sold for high prices and sometimes low. There have always been fluctuations in commodity prices. But over the years, the thrifty cotton planter at least made a respectable livelihood, and those people in the allied industries were working and not suffering the hunger of unemployment. But under the axe of a muddled-headed rubber-stamp Congress, 10.5 million acres of cotton were plowed under in 1933, and the crop limited to 10 million bales in 1935. Meanwhile, 60 million pounds of cottonseed oil cake were imported in 1935 from foreign farmers, thus depriving 54,000 rural Americans the opportunity for self-support by this one importation. And while America decreases her cotton output, South America, India, and Egypt vastly increase theirs, thus closing the foreign markets for our future cotton. And what of wheat and corn and tobacco? The merry song of the tractor pulling the planter over rich fields is sung very softly these days. 36 million acres of cotton, wheat, corn, and tobacco land was retired from cultivation by the unlawful AAA. That is 1/10 of the total acreage in cultivation in the United States. It is estimated that the cotton acreage reduction alone threw 750,000 farmhands out of work. These men with their families constitute in excess of 1.75 million people. Empty grain elevators, the storage place for wheat, which is potential bread for hungry Americans, tell the sad story of wheatless farms. Meanwhile, we imported as much wheat as would take over 2 million acres to grow and 61,000 people to cultivate. If the Congress thinks that's helping the American farmer, then we'd better change the Congress. Foreign farmers ought to hoist the American flag over their wheat fields. Hogs and pigs will soon be extinct as the dodo bird if the New Deal brainbusters keep on. 6,400,000 were slaughtered, 400 million pounds of pork at a cost of $30 million to the American taxpayers, you and me, and only 1/4 of that meat was used for food in a country where bread lines cast their dark shadows. This cartoon tells the hog story in Oklahoma. From 1930 to 1935, Oklahoma increased her cattle herds by 873,000 head. But in 1935, a single year, America imported nearly half of that many cattle from foreign stock raisers. Here's one reason why. Thousands of head of cattle were shot down by government agents as a part of the unholy gospel that prosperity can be gained through scarcity. The less you've got, the more you've got. Figure it out for yourself. I can't. Did these dead cattle feed anybody? Oh, no. To feed Americans, we imported 76 million pounds of foreign canned meats, 100 million pounds of meat products. In short, what we imported in cattle, meat, dairy, and meat products outweigh about half of all the cattle raised in Oklahoma. Good American food wasted when, as relief, Administrator Harry Hopkins reported 19 million people were on relief in this nation. If that's the New Deal, it's dealt from a stacked deck of marked cards. All this waste and mismanagement and relief is costing money. The Democratic Party doesn't own that money. The government doesn't own that money. It borrowed the money, and it isn't going to pay it back. You are going to pay it back. $35 billion. With what? Oklahoma farm family net incomes averaged over $1,000 in 1925, and in 1934, including the AAA payments, it averaged $510. As this cartoon shows, your farms used to be worth $42 an acre average. Now it's worth $22.20. And with mounting debts and increasing values, this administration destroys potential wealth and wastes potential foods and tells us we are living this life more abundantly. America should be ashamed of a program which destroys wealth in the face of hunger. The marketing experts of our government should be engaged in working out a plan whereby idle factories and wasted productive capacity should be employed to manufacture the raw materials of our farms into finished goods to be exchanged for our surplus farm produce, thereby enabling jobless men and women to consume farm surpluses and support themselves with a minimum of public grants. Without competition in the cash market for the normal domestic allotment. In this way, the farmer, instead of plowing under the cotton, would produce it and be able to buy for himself the shirts, the overalls, the cotton mattresses, the sheets, and the dress materials for his family. Now, folks, if I'm elected to the United States Senate, I would immediately advise that a conference be called of the nation's insurance executives at Washington, D.C., and there request them to furnish us with a list of all the farmlands, either that's owned outright by them or farmlands on which they hold first mortgages, with the hope and expectation that they will aid and assist us in going into partnership with the American farmers. These lands should be purchased back over a long period of time, 40, 50, or 60-year government bonds exchanged for these lands, and put the American farmer back on his feet if we are to restore prosperity to the American people. Oklahoma's two leading industries suffer also from overtaxation. This is particularly true on the consumption of oil products. Every car owner buying 10 gallons of gas pays 10 cents federal tax in addition to the posted state gasoline tax. This federal tax money is not earmarked for roads, although it amounts in Oklahoma to $14 million per year. The farmers pay $900,000 of this. My Democratic opponent voted for this tax. It should be repealed. If elected, I will vote against it. There are 116 taxes on oil, most of which fall directly or indirectly on the automobile owner. 20% of the federal internal revenue, exclusive of income tax, comes from oil. The industry employs 80,000 people in Oklahoma, and 1/8 of the crude oil revenue goes to the land and royalty owners. Prior to the enactment of the Federal Securities Act, $35 million came into Oklahoma annually from investors in oil royalties, now prevented by uninformed Washington bureaucrats. Those utterly ignorant of the oil industry should not be permitted to declare the subsurface mineral crop of the Oklahoma farmer to be forbidden fruit. Rather, should government encourage the exploration for new oil fields, since the power to protect the investor and owner from fraud and waste is always in its hand. In this matter, the present administration again displays its crazy quilt economic pattern. I now wish to examine some of the social implications of our relief organization. Is it necessary to transfer all the power of our people from the main streets of America to Pennsylvania Avenue and build up a vast political machine in order to satisfy the selfish greed of political racketeers in this nation? The answer is no. Nevertheless, such a machine has been built and is functioning here in Oklahoma. WPA, waste, politics, and avarice. Or it might mean wonderful political activity. Let's see. When contractors on a WPA project near Afton, Oklahoma, had $1,500 left on the completion of the job, they were told by the government to spend it all. So they hired 62 WPA workers to carry rocks and gravel 3 miles in buckets and dump it out again. Now that certainly was a very useful work for the United States government to be interested in. That's boondoggling. Nobody but a WPA executive could think of it. Now here's a picture of the brains end of a very, very busy WPA executive. And here's the modest home of another man on a relief job, Mr. Forrest Parrott in Oklahoma City. He was given his relief job for campaign services to my opponent. It only pays him $6,000 per year. That's not boondoggling. Mr. Forrest Parrott has offices in this building, the Commerce Exchange building. That's business because Mr. Parrott is in the oil business. Perhaps it's Mr. Parrott's oil that oils the WPA machine in Oklahoma, which has offices in another building, which is the Key building. Relief jobs should not be given to employed people who have bank accounts and own land. But my opponent is concerned in building a political machine in Oklahoma. Here's a sample. At Clinton, Oklahoma, WPA spent $25,000 for a camp for transients, $5,000 more for a sewer. Neither was ever used. It is a deserted village with 400 beds as empty as the heads which thought of the idea, and that's empty. And here is something still better. My opponent and his WPA machine are teaching singing and dancing so that we poor Oklahomans might live this life more abundantly. They say that this is to benefit the unfortunates. They say this is to benefit the unfortunates in those miserable shack towns which have grown so alarmingly since the New Deal arrived to rescue the forgotten man. I don't see how they're going to benefit, but if they vote for the dancing master, who is my opponent for the United States Senate, they might catch a few crumbs from the banquet table, at which his personal friends will be devouring the white meat and the gravy. Welfare work and politics are dirty bedfellows. And speaking of cabarets, the WPA built a highway to a proposed beer garden on Mount Scott near Lawton, while some of our most used farm-to-market roads are unpaved, an uneconomic situation.
This is the New Deal. My opponent says that this is placing human rights above property rights, that these things are being done in order that we may live this life more abundantly. I say it is waste, criminal, inhuman, unchristian waste. When God gave Adam and Eve the command to be fruitful and multiply, when God told Noah to build the ark, when God told Joseph the interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams, he was thinking of human rights above property rights. He was, however, thinking of property rights as human rights. He was thinking of nature as the servant of man, and not of man as the servant of nature. Waste? An economist has well said that the New Deal has done nothing that could not have been better done by an earthquake.
However, not even an earthquake could have produced the monkey love nest the WPA built for the monkeys at the Oklahoma City Zoo. $50,000 was spent on making the animals comfortable. Monkeys rate as high as professors. The latter are only getting $50,000 spent on the trout farm, adjacent to the university grounds at Norman, to make a golf course where they can knock a little white ball around. they knock it into a hole so they can pick it out again. This stimulates the professor's mental processes. Directly across the road is a 5-acre tract on which is located the Norman Water Tower. Men, women, and children live here in hovels, tents and boxes built from boards picked up from the back alley in the town of Norman. My opponent and his supervisors, timekeepers, and paymasters created the more abundant life for these hungry homeless families by building this golf course. They say they are protecting human rights above property rights. Well, it's human to watch people have fun, even when you're hungry. But that golf course, you know, is to have a 6-foot rock wall to screen the antics of the professors. The boathouse built by the WPA at Mohawk Park in Tulsa County is more open to the eye. In fact, it's about 40 feet from the water. It costs $13,000, and to get a boat in it, you'd have to carry the boat to it. You farmers whose stock farms have shriveled in the summer drought should take a long and thirsty look at this project. And now for something more serious. As everyone knows, the poor need shoes. The WPA is doing good work in collecting old shoes and repairing them for needy people. But why didn't someone in our 90 different bureaus in Washington think of saving the hides of those murdered cattle and making decent shoes for them? Answer that. If they had, the children in these forsaken homes of forgotten people might have had warm feet this winter, and more important, the self-respect which well-shod feet engenders. At the beginning of the New Deal administration of relief, no one would have believed that a political party could so degenerate that it would build up a political machine through the needs of distressed humanity. Yet my opponent, through his intimates, the captains of relief agencies and administration bosses in Washington, built for himself, out of the WPA of Oklahoma, the most dangerous political machine that ever invaded this state. More than a year ago, it became a general topic of comment that any applicant for a fat swivel chair WPA job must first secure the endorsement of my opponent. He alone could give the password to the inner circle of the WPA roundtable. It was and is a closed political corporation, cloaking its political machinations in the garb of sweet charity. To maintain the disguise, cooperation is necessary. Mr. Forrest Parrott, my opponent's campaign manager, took rooms in the Wells Roberts Hotel on the 4th floor. Mr. Vaughn, assistant to the director of District 4 of the WPA, and Mr. Talley, Oklahoma County superintendent of the WPA, took rooms on the 8th floor. A private telephone connected the two suites. What secret messages passed through these lines, which were too dangerous for the regular hotel system which connected the two apartments anyway? From this hotel was conducted my opponent's campaign among the WPA workers of the state. Official government records of the names and addresses of timekeepers, foremen, and men and women employees of every WPA project in Oklahoma found their way into Mr. Parrott's campaign headquarters and the Wells Roberts Hotel, the main office of capitalized human suffering. Well-oiled and engineered by erstwhile Professor Beard, this political machine in the Democratic primaries rolled over the prostrate bodies of the poor, over the volunteer workers for Senator Gore, crashed through the ranks of farmers' union workers in towns and clubs and crushed the state organization of Governor Marland. It is the modern political counterpart of the biblical four horsemen of destruction, and its boilers are fueled with fear. The founder of the Democratic Party was Thomas Jefferson. He tells us that the most sacred right of our people is the right of local self-government, and that government is best which governs least. That means free enterprise, free initiative, freedom to earn and save without fear of inflation, depreciation, or the tax collector. This is security. When the American farmers again control the nation's food supply, with the cost of production guaranteed plus a reasonable profit, streets will be filled with shoppers. Bills will be promptly paid by labor employed in the shops, mines, mills, factories, and the oil fields of the state and nation. The raw materials produced in this nation and the finished goods, wares, and merchandise manufactured in America without competition of foreign farmers and laborers will create greater purchasing power and wealth in this nation and help the small merchants and businessmen along the main streets of America.
Remove the jobless army from cutthroat competition with employed labor. Reward useful labor and management with its fair share of the potential production of the richest nation on earth. Human need and social service should be the first charge upon industry. Profits should be the byproducts. That is the only procedure by which we can again make industry profitable to private enterprise. Otherwise, we shall all be crushed under the burden of taxes and increasing debts. The best assurance against foreign entanglements is to give domestic employment to American capital and American labor. Foreign wars are the consequence of the struggle for foreign markets in which nations seek new markets. The economic basis of the World War was the struggle between England and Germany for the South American market. Politicians who have not hesitated to use relief funds for political purposes will not hesitate to engage in foreign entanglements and foreign wars in order to keep their grip on the spoils of office and power in this nation. The idea of taking the profits out of war is not a new one, but has long been the program of the American Legion, of which I'm a member, and the time has undoubtedly arrived when every well-thinking person knows and understands that profits will and must be taken out of any future conflict. But folks, I'm more concerned in taking the profits out of the politics of the WPA in this state and nation than I am about thinking about a war that does not now exist except an economic war. Oklahoma is the leading Indian state of this nation. We have here in Oklahoma more than 1/3 of all the Indians of America. To date, no general, comprehensive program of Indian legislation has ever been effected for Oklahoma Indians. Now, my opponent has admitted in a public statement at Muskogee, Oklahoma during the primary that he knows nothing whatever about Indian legislation or the problems of Oklahoma Indians, but that when he wanted to find out anything about it, he always went to Elmer Thomas. I am an 8th blood Cherokee Indian. I know the history of Indian legislation in this nation from its inception to date. I know the Indian treaties. I know the history of Indian claims. I know the problems of the American Indian. I favor naming an Oklahoma Indian for Commissioner of Indian Affairs, a man who has a sympathetic understanding of the Indian problems. No white man should hold this position. The white man has been long on promises, but short on action. Now, I favor a special tribunal appointed for the sole purpose of settling Indian claims, some of which have been pending for over 100 years. Folks, we're standing today at the crossroads in the march of civilization. This great nation cannot survive
if we continue to transfer all the power of our people from the main streets of America to the boards, bureaus, and commissions in Washington, D.C. The object and the purpose of mankind on earth is to make this place we call a world a better place in which to live. It can only occur when we begin to set our nation's house in order. And that means for the American farmer, the American labor and wage earner, and the American businessman.
If you have liked this movie, tell your friends about it. Take home the literature which is being handed to you. Read it and study it. Join the Oklahoma builder-uppers of Herbert K. Hyde. Organize your precinct for Election Day. Be sure that on November 3rd, your vote is cast and fairly counted. Herbert K. Hyde, as your next United States Senator, will give you the same sort of hard-hitting service that he gave in putting kidnappers, gangsters, and stock swindlers behind the bars. Herbert K. Hyde is a hard worker, a hard thinker. He is sincere, young, qualified, capable, progressive, and high-principled. Oklahoma can well take pride in sending Herbert K. Hyde to Washington to serve her interest in the United States Senate.